I'm Nick. For a special edition, we have with us today Thomas Frank. You know, I really like some of the things that Thomas Frank has come out with, and I just want to give him some time to go ahead and introduce himself to our audience here at the Progressive Army.
Hey guys, it's me. It's Thomas Frank. What should I say? I write books. I've written a new one, Listen, Liberal, where I finally, uh, sort of examine what the Democrats are like in a sort of sociological sense.
Yeah, I remember reading your book. What was that? What's the Matter with Kansas?
Yeah,
And The Wrecking Crew.
yeah,
And so now I'm reading this last one, Listen, Liberal, and I think those books kind of helped me make my transition. I read so many books during that time period, but your books are amongst some of my favorites, especially the last one and the first one.
well,
I love
thank you.
those two especially stick out. I reread those, very, very often.
Yeah.
But you talk about Listen Liberal, and you just said you're examining that the Democratic Party more so in a broader sociological sense. Like, what kind of led you to go down that path?
Well, a lot of it was that I felt like, looking back at all of these earlier books I'd written about conservatism, that I would always have a final chapter in the book where I would say, and a lot of this criticism would apply to the Democrats as well. It'd always be this little chapter that I would stick on at the very end. And I finally just decided, enough of this. Let's say what I mean. Let's come out and say it and explain why I think that.
Yeah, I really thought, like, I was like, oh, this is perfect because the paradigm of Democrats being the party of the people and Republicans being the great evil, that paradigm is so very strong. Why don't you just kind of starting back from inside of the book, you talk about how they switched after the George McGovern commission.
Yeah, yeah. So the Democrats decided back in the late 60s and the early 70s to change the kind of party that they were. It's a really interesting time. A lot of stuff was going on, and they basically, what they did, to make a very long story short, and the McGovern Commission did a lot of good things, by the way. These are the people that we have to thank for the primary system. Well, actually, I say we have to thank them for it. It's so messed up, It's such a screwed up system. But anyhow, it was an improvement over what they had before. But one of the things that they did, sort of, I don't want to say inadvertently, it wasn't out in the open, but they did it deliberately, and that was to remove organized labor from this sort of position of power in the Democratic Party. And you understand why they did it at the time. I mean, this was the late 60s and the early 70s, and organized labor looked pretty conservative. These were very white organizations. These were not particularly democratic organizations, and they also supported, a lot of them supported the Vietnam War. And so that's why they did what they did. What they didn't understand at the time was that when you do something like that, when you remove working people's organizations, from their position in the party for whatever reason, you also wind up over the long term removing the voices of working people. And that was the mistake that they made, and they've never really turned back from that. They decided back then that they were going to be. And by the way, interrupt me. You should tell me to shut up because I have a tendency to talk too much.
Well, historians, generally do, but guess what? You're saying some very, very, very important stuff, so by all means.
Okay, so they decided at the same time that they were making this choice about organized labor. They decided at the same time that what they really wanted to be was not a party of working people anymore, but a party of the professional class. That's the group that they really admired in the early 70s, and they continue to admire them. And they produced, the Democratic Party produced all this literature in the 70s and the 80s and up into the 90s about how the professional, the sort of highly educated, affluent, white collar class was really the group that they needed to reach out to. And it remains that to this day. So today, when the Democrats talk about all the different groups, the constituencies that are in the Democratic tent, and organized labor is still there, but they don't really call the shots anymore. And they have other groups. They have minorities. They have the young, but it's upper class, or I'm sorry, what would you say? White collar, affluent professionals. that is the number one group. These are the people that come first, that get listened to. You know, these are people, by the way, who are very happy with the Democratic Party. They don't get, like, you know, upset about what's going on right now.